Let's get more on that situation in South Korea now, where South Korea's president has in the past few minutes confirmed he will lift martial law after that opposition vote. The US says it is watching events unfolding there with grave concerns. North America correspondent Carrington Clark, who was previously deployed in Seoul, he joins us now from Washington. Carrington, what's the reaction in the US been to these developments?
Well, the US has made clear that they were not given advanced warning by the South Korean president that he was going to be declaring martial law. And although this is a domestic political dispute at this point, it could have wide-ranging global geopolitical implications. South Korea is a key US ally. There are about 30,000 US troops stationed in South Korea, primarily to defend against the threat of war between the North and South. They're still technically at war. There is only an armistice separating South and North Korea, but there is always the potential for it to become once again a fully fledged hot war. Now, the Pentagon has said that there has been no change to the posture of the US services in South Korea. And we've also heard that US President Joe Biden, who's currently traveling in Africa, is being kept updated with what's occurring. Obviously, this is a rapidly changing environment in South Korea. And so obviously, if we do have this martial law a declaration pulled back after that vote in the legislature, you would think that would calm the nerves both in Korea but also for the United States. The US is obviously also concerned that any instability in South Korea could be seized upon by both North Korea but also by its strategic rival China. Earlier we did hear from the State Department who said that they are gravely concerned about what's occurring but are watching closely and communicating directly with their South Korean counterparts.
Our alliance with the ROK is ironclad, and we stand by Korea in their time of uncertainty. I also want to just underscore that we have every hope and expectation that any political disputes will be resolved peacefully and in accordance with the rule of law.
Carrington, you spent considerable time as our correspondent in South Korea. Can you give us some context on the current situation?
Well, in some ways, it's not surprising to see this conflict between the presidency and the legislature in South Korea, despite the fact that it has this flourishing economy, such an innovative country. It is a relatively new democracy, and it had its own issues with military dictatorships up until the 1980s. It also does have a history of jailing its former presidents. When I was there, 2 former presidents were currently in jail. Since the 1980s, 4 have been jailed. A separate former president took his own life after being under investigation by prosecutors. And actually, the current president was instrumental in the jailing of a former president. So President Yoon knew that once he lost political power, history would suggest that his very freedom was at risk. But this was a giant political gamble to declare martial law, despite knowing that the opposition had such complete control over the parliament, was an extraordinary move. And now we will see how this plays out for him, both politically, whether or not we will see the parliament impeach him, but also whether or not his very freedom is now at risk.
Carrington, we've seen some live pictures as well of people storming the National Assembly. How do you think South Koreans are going to react to the situation there?
Well, South Koreans also do have this history of turning out in large force into the streets. We've seen it time and time again over the decades, that they're able to mobilise people power in order to put pressure on their governments, on their president, in order to see a change of power. So in some ways, these scenes are reminiscent of what we've seen in the past. And obviously, the role of the military is always key, but it seems quite clear, according to the polls and obviously in the parliamentary election results, that the president is deeply unpopular in South Korea. And you would have always thought that the opposition would be able to mobilize their supporters and the Korean population at large in order to put this pressure on. We've already heard from the opposition leader, who is the man who was defeated so narrowly in the 2022 election, that this chaos is an opportunity. So we will see how the opposition is able to negotiate this immediate period, whether or not we do see an impeachment vote, whether or not we then see the current president pulled from office, and then what that means for the transition of power in Korea. But Korean presidents only get one term in office, and we have seen time and time again that at the midterm elections, the opposition tends to do very well. It effectively renders the president a lame duck. What we've seen, though, with President Yoon is that he was unwilling to accept this kind of neutering of his power, and his response seems to have been an attempt to basically take control through martial law. We're now seeing people power play out, and you would think that this is an almost untenable position for the current president, but Korean politics is unpredictable, so we'll see how this does play out.